Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Savor Food and Body. Today, I'm talking with Wendy McCullen. She is a burnout and alcohol coach and wellness expert and the host of the Bite-Sized Balance podcast. Wendy teaches busy professionals who are nearing burnout and often using alcohol to cope how to reclaim time for themselves, reduce stress, build healthier habits, and increase their daily joy. No stranger to burnout, Wendy spent 12 plus years working as a lawyer, then partner in Calgary. As a busy litigator and mom of 2 young children, she struggled to find her work-life balance. And in 2008, she left law to create a life she didn't need to escape from. Alcohol-free since January 2018, Wendy is also a senior certified Naked Mind alcohol coach. You can find more about Wendy at her website, wendymccullen.com, and follow her on Instagram at Beat the Burnout and Booze, which will have links to all of those in the show notes. Wendy, thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us today and share your experience and expertise with us.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I'm happy to be here. Thanks for asking me.
Anything else you'd like to add to introducing yourself?
No, I don't think so. That was very thorough. Thank you.
So how did you go from being a partner in a large law firm to becoming this burnout and an alcohol coach? Talk to us a little bit about what that journey was like for you.
Well, I mean, it really has been a very long journey. It's not something that happened overnight. I practiced law for 12 years. I was a partner for the last 5 years. I had 2 babies within 7 months, adopted a newborn baby. I was pregnant with my daughter at the time, and then became partner kind of right around the same time. So there was an awful lot of stress there around caregiving responsibilities and work responsibilities. And I had no coping mechanisms really in place to help me manage that. And that led to my own burnout, which I didn't have a word for at the time. I also was in a career that was not resonant for me ever. So it was just the wrong career for me. I always like to let people know that. I don't know whether I would have burnt out if I'd loved what I was doing, but I didn't love it. And I knew that there was something out there that would fulfill me more. I didn't know what it was. So eventually, couldn't do it anymore and left the practice of law, spent a year home with my kids, which was amazing because I'd hardly seen them in the first 5 years of their life. I spent a year home with them before they started school. And then I thought, well, what am I going to do now? Because I knew I couldn't not do anything. It just wasn't going to work for me. So I went back to school, did a certification in natural nutrition. And that's really where I started. And all of this is sort of happening in conjunction with my own personal journey of trying to recover from burnout and figure out what the right balance in life was for me, what I needed more of, what I needed less of in my life. And recovery from burnout can take a long time. I always say, I don't think I fully recovered from burnout until I stopped drinking, which was 4.5 years ago. So, this is a long process. I started out coaching around food, did that for a few years, wrote 2 cookbooks, really enjoyed a lot of that, but it was not lighting me up inside. And in the course of doing that, what I realized is that most of the women I was working with didn't really need information or advice around what to eat. They were struggling with how on earth to make it work practically, given the amount of overwhelm and stress in their lives, which is what led me into naturally coaching around burnout. And then eventually I realized I really just wanted to do more generalized life coaching around burnout and do less of the food stuff. I went back, I did some more training as a coach, generalized life coach training. And through all of this, of course, I was getting a little healthier and I was incorporating more balanced practices in my life and mindfulness and all the rest of it, but I was still drinking. And I started drinking when I was like everybody, I guess I started drinking first late in high school and then into college years, but it all looked very typical and normal. And in my university years, law school years, when I started practicing law, it was really clear to me that it was part of the job to drink. And I started, it was sort of like, I got professional with it. When I was a lawyer, I figured out how to do it and do it well, as part of my job. I still wasn't using it as a coping mechanism though. It wasn't until the end stage, it's really the end of my time as a lawyer, that I started using it as a way to escape. And when that happened, that's when everything changed for me. And then when I moved back to my hometown, with my kids, quit the practice of law and did all these things I've been talking about, that's when my drinking actually escalated. So it's weird. It wasn't connected to increased stress for me, at least not work stress. For me, my drinking escalated as a result of more what was missing and less of what I had too much of. I think now in hindsight, I can see that clearly. And also the timing was perfect in that this thing we call mummy wine culture was just taking off. So wine and alcohol was everywhere I went with my kids. After I stopped practicing law, it was at birthday parties. It was at book club, splurge club, the bowling alley, like you name it, it was everywhere. And it was normalized. So it just felt like I was just doing what everybody else did. And I was, but at a certain point, it started to become clear to me that I was using it more to escape and less to have fun. And that is when I think it really started to become a problem. And as I said, I didn't get to a place where I had some clarity around that until about 4.5 years ago, which is when I stopped drinking. So that's a really long answer to that question. I hope I answered what you actually asked me.
No, I think that's perfect. And one of the things that I want to highlight, what you said, is that, the drinking became part of the job as you were a lawyer. And in a way, it became part of the socializing as a young mom too. And that's something that I want us to really name and clarify today too for listeners, because I've had many clients that, as they're approaching their life, they're maybe noticing that alcohol really isn't working for them, but they're still at a loss of like, well, but how do I socialize? Right. How do I relate? Like, I'm starting to see negative effects of the alcohol, or we're starting to become more attuned to our bodies, and then we're just more in touch and seeing what's going on. But they're kind of at a loss of like, well, I don't know how to relate to my people if I don't have this too. And to midlife and clearly what you went through too, can often feel like this collision of stress and overwhelm. And then if we have the hormone imbalances going on too with midlife and a lot of uncertainty. And so, what, from your experience working with folks, what are some of the biggest challenges your clients are facing with midlife and kind of adjusting, like, I don't know where alcohol lands for me in this space now.
Yeah. Well, first of all, we can't deal with it in the same way we could deal with it when we were 20. So as our bodies change, we just, we talk about it. There's a naturopath that I have on my podcast all the time. We always talk about this like window of tolerance and how it shrinks as we move into the perimenopausal years. And so really that just means like all the things that irritated us before just we need less of them to irritate ourselves. And alcohol falls in that category. So a lot of the women that I work with have started to notice that. They started to notice that their tolerance, it's not necessarily their tolerance in terms of how it affects them in the moments of drinking, but it's more outside of that. So how it affects their sleep, their energy levels, their mood. And there's so much science around alcohol that's can be really helpful to learn for women, because it is actually physiologically doing that. It's making it really difficult for you to sleep and sleep deeply. It's increasing your anxiety levels because it increases the amount of cortisol you produce. And so when you talk about that intersection of stress and hormones that happens for so many women in their 40s, it's like the perfect storm when you add alcohol to it, because it just makes all of those things worse. But it feels like it's making all of those things better. So it feels like if I have a glass of red wine, I can relax. It feels like if I have a couple of drinks, it's going to be easier for me to fall asleep, And so it feels like it's actually making our lives more fun, as you said, in terms of the socializing piece of it. So these are all, when I'm working with women, these are all the types of things that I say, okay, I get that you believe that to be true. I believe that you believe that to be true. I believed that to be true, like the sky is blue. But can we leave a little space for the possibility that it's not quite right? What if something else was true about this? And then we really approach things from the perspective of an experiment, which is what I encourage anyone who's listening to do. So do you really know that? Does it really help your sleep? What happens if you don't drink for a few nights in a row? Is your sleep better? Is your sleep worse? What do you notice? Do you have more energy in the morning when you wake up? Same thing around the socializing. This is really where I'd suggest you start, because I think we make a lot of assumptions around the critical role of alcohol when it comes to maintaining friendships and socializing. And I always say, like, how will you know if that's true? And the only way to know if it's true is to try it a different way and to maintain, like, keep an open mind and all of that. Just stay really curious. So if you have always done a certain thing with a group of people with alcohol, what's it like to do it without alcohol? And you don't need to commit to doing it forever without alcohol, but just try it one time. What's it like to do this thing without alcohol? Do I miss out on anything? How does it make me feel? What parts of the night are easier? What parts of the night are harder? How do I feel about it the next day? How's my sleep? All of those things. And learn for yourself, because you can have people like me on podcasts tell you that you don't need alcohol to socialize, that life is way more fun without it. I could tell you this till I'm blue in the face, but until you experience it, you're not going to believe it. Just like I didn't believe it when I was still drinking. I could not fathom a life without alcohol. It was so intertwined with every aspect of my life as a mom, as a friend, as a wife. It was so enmeshed in all of that I could not imagine how I could live without it. And I definitely thought life was going to be no fun without alcohol, but giving myself the gift of just being able to experiment with it with no strings. So this isn't forever, but what I decided was I would take 30 days off of alcohol and just see. Because the way I explain it is, we're walking around with half of the deck of cards, and the half of the deck of cards that we have is all about what it's like to be a drinker for most of us, right? And I'd spent the first 25, whatever it was, I don't know, more than that, years of my life as a drinker. And I had no information. I did not have the other half of the deck of cards. My brain was filling in the gaps, but of course, the only information it had was from that one half of the deck of cards, right? So my brain's telling me, oh, this is going to suck. This is going to be so hard. You're not going to have any fun. All your friendships are going to change. I needed to see for myself whether that was true. And the most amazing thing about it is that none of it turned out to be true for me. And again, I don't know whether that'll be the case for you if you're listening, but I think there's a pretty good chance, because this is what I do for a living. And so I see it happening all the time. You need to learn it for yourself. You need to see it for yourself, and going into it with that experiment mindset. I'm giving myself the gift, the opportunity to gather the other half of the deck of cards just to see. So now I can actually make an informed decision about whether I drink, as opposed to just doing it because I'm assuming I have to. Is, I think, a really freeing approach to your relationship with alcohol.
I love that analogy of the deck of cards too. And as you were talking about that, I think that can apply to so much in our life, to any relationship that we have, even if it's relationship with food, with your body, with the people that you're around too. We only know what that half a deck of cards through our experiences. We've gathered those cards, and we only know what those say. We like to make all kinds of assumptions about what the other half of the cards is gonna say in our life.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you can apply this experiment mindset, which is really the basis of this naked mind approach to changing your relationship with alcohol. So that's why I keep talking about experiment, but I use it in all the coaching that I do. I use it around when women are experimenting with changing their careers or working less, or, just trying to exercise more. We use this experiment mindset. What's it going to be like? What's going to work? What's not going to work? I don't know, because I haven't done it yet, but I really want to find out. Right. And if it doesn't go right, that's just a data point. That's what we call it. So for example, if your plan is to try to take a 30-day break from alcohol, but there's a day where you decide to drink, that's not a failure or a mistake. It's a data point. And so just like a data point in any scientific experiment, you're going to take that and you're going to learn everything you can from it. And then you're going to use that going forward to set yourself up for greater success. You're going to tweak things so that you have a greater chance of not drinking the next time you find yourself in those circumstances, if that's what you decide you want after that data point, right? So I agree. It's a really great approach to just about any aspect of your life.
Yeah, keeping things open, curious, and by keeping it open, we bring in more compassion too.
Yes,
while we're doing it. so key.
So self-compassion is the other key. We use two keys, curiosity and self-compassion. So I'm so glad you highlighted that. It's such a critical part of an experiment. You need to stay in self-compassion, recognize that there's no way to mess this thing up. It's about learning. And there's really no right or wrong to it either. It's just you see what happens and then you take that and you learn from that.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to back up just a little bit. For people have heard on this podcast before about burnout, but I'd love to hear your definition and like, what does that look like, especially as we're moving into this midlife space? What are some of the qualities, characteristics that you see in the people you work with that you would classify as burnout?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And burnout is defined as chronic unmitigated stress. That's really the best definition of burnout. I'm just grabbing my notes because I'm going to go through some of the signs. Burnout is, so really it's chronic unmitigated stress, which means it's like you're going into fight or flight and you're just kind of staying there. And the reason why I like to give that definition is because there are lots of ways for you to pull yourself out of fight or flight and actually mitigate that stress. I think as women, we're really good at talking about stress management and very poor generally at actually doing it. So we pay a lot of lip service to it, but then we don't actually do it. The reason the stress management is so important is because it breaks up the stress. So that it mitigates the stress. It pulls you out of that fight or flight, which means it helps to prevent you from ever getting to burnout. When it comes to the women that I work with, which are mostly women in midlife, really the stress is usually coming from two different places. It's coming from job or occupational stress, which is what we most often associate with burnout. So we usually think of it as a career-related thing. And that's because the World Health Organization has actually defined it as an occupational phenomenon. And so the only real official, it's not even a diagnosis, but the official phenomenon that's been identified is a workplace phenomenon. But it's really important to understand that the other piece of stress, caregiver stress, is just as relevant when it comes to pushing women into a place where they're in a chronic state of elevated cortisol, right? So usually the women I'm working with in midlife have a combination of caregiver stress and occupational stress. Most of them are kind of at the height of their careers. Like they've been working really hard and they're now at this really kind of great place. So they feel good about their careers, but it's also really demanding. And then for a lot of them, they're just coming out of the really crazy child rearing years. So they're just at the end of that. And that is just a natural place for burnout to happen because it's been chronic, unmitigated stress, usually for the women I work with, for most of their 30s and their early 40s. And then on top of that, you have the hormonal changes happening as part of perimenopause. So these three things come together. And again, it's the perfect storm for burnout. And if you throw alcohol in the mix, well, then it's probably even more of a perfect storm. But the way that burnout presents, I mean, there are so many different signs of burnout and you don't need to have all of them to be in burnout. And just because you have some of them doesn't mean you're in burnout. So I'm going to give some of them just so that you can get a sense of it. But I always say, if you're listening to me as I'm giving out these signs and you're thinking, yeah, got that, don't have that, got that, don't have that, got that, just the fact that you've got that is probably a sign that it's worth doing some work around because none of these things feel good. And so then there are lots of things that you can do proactively to help reverse them and feel better. So common signs of burnout, exhaustion is almost always the first one in women. Mental, physical, emotional exhaustion. You're done. Also, I want to be clear, a lot of these signs can be connected to other physical and physiological underlying problems. So I'm in no way suggesting this is a diagnosis. These are just common signs of burnout. So exhaustion. And then something that is very particular to burnout, I think, is that your attitude starts to switch. So women will often say, I don't know what's going on. I used to be this glass half full, everything's great kind of person, very positive. And now I feel very cynical and pessimistic. I've kind of lost hope and it feels like the glass is half empty every day. That often happens in burnout. Decreased productivity and work performance very often will show up. If you're not working at a job outside of the home, you might see that happening in the home. You just can't, you're not as focused and productive as you once were. Being preoccupied by work when you're not there. This is a big one. So for me, when I was in the last 5 years of my practice, I was also a partner at the law firm. I had these two little kids. I would wake up in the middle of the night almost every night with my hamster wheel going, thinking about all the things I was going to forget at work or I had already forgotten at work, and I'd write them down on a notepad and I'd bring that to work. So I was constantly thinking about work, even when I was sleeping. And then when I was at work, I was thinking about my kids. Oh my gosh, did I forget this person's immunization? When does it, oh, how I forgot, I didn't do this swimming lesson registration. Georgia's boots are too small, like all of these things. And I'm writing those down on a piece of paper. So again, I had two types of burnout going on. I had caregiver burnout and occupational burnout, and I couldn't turn either of them off when I was at the other place, if that makes sense. That's often how burnout looks for people. Then we see almost always that women just don't take care of themselves in the way that they have previously taken care of themselves. You just start not taking care of yourself as well. Of course, you're exhausted, right? So your food, your exercise, your sleep, those things start to fall. And then we also see in conjunction with that, an increased reliance on unhealthy coping mechanisms, because of course you're just trying to get through, right? You just need to get through it. And I mean, I don't know how many times I've said those words, but for my late 30s and early 40s, up until I stopped drinking, it was all about getting through the day. I just have to get through the day. And sometimes wine helped me get through the day, or so I thought. Then we often see friction in personal relationships. So people at work start to irritate the heck out of you. Sometimes it's people in your personal life too, start to really bug you. You just don't have a tolerance for them anymore. And then I think the most common thing I hear is something like this: I don't get it. I've got everything I thought I ever wanted, but I'm not happy. It feels like something's missing and I don't know what it is. And that was absolutely it for me. I couldn't figure out what was missing. It took me a long time to get to the place where I actually said, I think something's missing, because for a long time, I just thought I had way too much going, and it was an overwhelm thing, which was also there for me. But really the thing that was leading to the dissatisfaction was the stuff that was missing for me. And then eventually with burnout, unfortunately, it often leads to health consequences. So that chronically elevated cortisol will lead to all kinds of problems like high blood pressure, high blood sugar, triglycerides, and that of course sets you up for a higher risk of a lot of chronic diseases. So those are all the signs that can show up. They don't always all show up. And sometimes they show up and they have nothing to do with burnout. So it's not in any way definitive, but hopefully that helps people understand what I'm talking about when I'm talking about burnout.
Right. I think that's great. And one of the things that you just were saying there towards the end too, in that people feeling like something's missing. Mm-hmm. And what I see a lot in my work is life isn't satisfying. And then how that relates into, I'm trying to find satisfaction with food.
Right.
And so and often paired with not having enough energy, mental capacity to move into that taking care of myself space. And so again, we're looking to food to find that missing piece.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I see that this ends up being so common. And oftentimes when I have conversations with women and I'm asking about satisfying, like, hey, what would make this meal satisfying? Like, what is even satisfying about food? And that's a really hard conversation to have, and hard for them to pull out, because they're having a hard time finding satisfaction anywhere.
Right. And they're not going to find it through food if that's not what they actually need. Right. And this is the problem. And it gives us a false sense of that, because it's a distraction. It takes up time. It takes our mind off the problem. It's a numbing thing, just like alcohol is. So it works in the moment for us, but it actually doesn't do anything to satisfy the underlying need. And so the real question to start asking yourself is, what do I actually need right now? What is it I'm feeling, and why am I feeling it? And it's so hard to get to the bottom of that, but you're never going to get there if you keep just pouring the glass of wine, or pulling out, if you're me, pulling out the bag of tortilla chips. Like, you're just not going to get there. It requires you to do the hard work. And I actually think this is the most meaningful form of self-care, is this hard work. It's like, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm actually going to give myself some space and grace here. And I'm going to try to feel this thing and figure out what the heck it is. Because it wasn't until I stopped drinking that I was able to do that, because I stopped numbing and escaping every single night. And I had to sit with it, and I had to figure out what it was. And it was a long process of figuring out what the need was that wasn't being filled. And it wasn't even just one thing. But for me, it became pretty clear to me that I needed more connection in my life. So I needed more meaningful female friendships. And I had to go out and work at that. Again, self-care, it's hard, but I went out and did that at the age of like 47, find some new friends. I also realized that I'd had zero creative outlet in my life since I was since law school, really. So since I was 23 or 24, I'd had no creative outlet, which had been a key part of me as a person up until that point. So I started writing and doing all of these things that I just had forgotten all about. And I also realized that I wanted to have some success in my business, and I hadn't, and that was something that was missing for me. I had spent 15 years just focused on my kids, working part-time, coaching part-time, enjoying it, but I wanted to do something different with it. And I needed to do that. So it's not an easy answer. I mean, those answers weren't easy for me to come up with. I had to go try all kinds of different things. Again, experiment, right? Like, I don't know what the answer is here, but I'm going to try pickleball. I'm going to try felting. I'm going to try all these things until I finally find something that feels good. And when you know, like when you get there, because you don't feel like something's missing anymore. And you also don't feel the same overwhelming urge to reach for the tortilla chips or the glass of wine. That's the truth of it.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great clarification too, of just that finding satisfaction in life, that finding what is missing and recognizing that no coping mechanism is going to fill that. Mm-hmm. Like you said, you have to do that hard work. And I'm so glad that you named that is the most intricate part of self-care, is mm-hmm. to take the time and do the work. And so many women, when they've been in this space for so long, they think that it's selfish to take the time, or assuming, there's several steps that need to happen before they're even allowing themselves to take the time and say, hey, mm-hmm. this is what I need to go look for what's missing, and I need to figure this out. We've already kind of talked about this a little bit, but I'm curious if when you're working with clients that are working to address alcohol as that socially acceptable coping mechanism, how do you help them look beyond that as the socially acceptable coping mechanism and a way of social connection? And one of the things that parallel that came up in my mind as I was writing this question is, it feels really common to what women do with food in their bodies also as a way of social connection. In terms of, it's socially acceptable, it's what we talk about. Maybe we're gathering around the cheese plate with our glass of wines, and we're talking about like how we're going to make up for that food and drink tomorrow. That they're pretty tightly wound together, it seems. It has been for many of my clients. So when you're working with folks, how do you address that social aspect of, do you really need this? And how do you help them move forward? Like some steps that you might walk them through.
Yeah, it's a great question. Again, I'd go back to I'd just do a very short-term experiment around it. I would just pick a night or an event and just see what it's like without alcohol, and try to go in without any preconceived notions around how it's going to go. If you assume it's going to be really hard and horrible, it probably will be really hard and horrible. But if you go in with an open mind and you think, gee, I wonder, maybe this will be more fun without alcohol. I don't actually know. You'd be amazed what will happen. But I think the other piece to remember about alcohol is, it is like food, and that we do talk about it a lot. There's this whole mummy wine culture thing I was alluding to. It's a real thing, and it's a real problem. And it is in many ways perpetuated by us. And I was part of it. So I'm in no way being critical or judgmental here, but these memes that we send around and share, and all of these cards we give each other where they're all alcohol. I know what you need, this rosé all day. I whine because you whine. That whole culture is normalizing drinking as a coping mechanism for moms. Not only normalizing it, it's mandatory. You can't parent without this thing, which in itself is a really troubling message to be sending women. So I think that's a piece of the conversation. The conversation's happening because there's we're just surrounded by it in the media. And by the way, this is a very concerted, directed marketing scheme by the alcohol industry. So they became well aware of the fact that there was this underserved segment of the market that was women, and they focused their energy on it. This is why we have pink labels on wine and high-heeled shoes on the front of wine, and Mummy's Little Helper is the name of wine. It's because the alcohol industry wants you to drink more so they can make more money. And I'm not a conspiracy theorist. This is just 100% true. And also, I think it bears noting of the fact that the alcohol industry, like most big business out there, is run by men. So it makes me angry, but I think this is a big piece of why the conversation is so normal with women. So even just stopping and thinking about it, like, what am I talking about here? Why am I talking about this thing? Like, I need it to parent. I'm 100% capable of being an amazing mother without a drug. I don't need this to parent. And then also the messaging that it's sending out to your friends and to your kids, frankly. Like when I actually stopped to think about what that shirt, there's a little onesie that I almost bought for a kid at some point when I was still deep in the red wine. And it said, I drink because you cry. Mommy drinks because you cry. That's what it said. And I remember thinking, oh, this is cute. And then now I think about that, like what kind of a message is that sending to my child to see a picture? I didn't buy it, by the way, but if he saw a picture of himself in that, or me, making a light of this like cute onesie that I got him, I'm sending him the message that he's so hard to parent that I need to drink, which is utter garbage and terrible, frankly. So I think part of it is the alcohol industry, the marketing and all the language that goes around this, that's influencing that conversation that's happening. But I also think there's, just like with food, there's this a huge undercurrent of conversation that's not happening. So this unspoken shame around drinking that lots of women have. And I had it. And I wasn't talking about that. I wasn't saying to my friends, oh my God, do you get up at 3 a.m. and Google, am I an alcoholic? Because I do. I didn't say that to anyone. I wasn't saying like, oh, do you sometimes regret the fact that you drank like every single day? That conversation wasn't happening because we're not talking about that. So what I want to do is normalize the conversation around alcohol for women. I want to help change the dialogue. And I clearly cannot do this by myself, but I love to come on podcasts and talk about it just so we'll start thinking about it. Like, why is it so normal to talk about alcohol this way? And, it's a drug. We separate it. We talk about alcohol and drugs like they're two separate things, but they're not. It's a drug. It's actually the most harmful drug out there. And I'm not in any way suggesting that everybody needs to not drink, but I think we do need to drink with some informed consent. We need to understand what's happening and at the very least have our blinders off when it comes to the marketing and what's influencing our choices around alcohol and how we're talking about it. So the reason I said all of that is to say this, that undercurrent, that non-conversation, the conversation that's not happening is there. And so if you're someone who's thinking, I think I might like to drink less, or it might serve me to just not drink at this event or to not drink as much as I do at all. If you're thinking that, you are not alone in that, even though no one else is saying it. So you're thinking to yourself, oh my gosh, how can I possibly host this brunch and not serve mimosas? We always have mimosas at the brunch. I guarantee you there are women in your circle who are going to be happy as hell that there are no mimosas at the brunch because they're tired of thinking about drinking, just like you are, right? So that's something to remember as well in all of this. But then, of course, the other piece is go out and try it without alcohol and experiment with it. Be the person at the party who's having a great time, who's not drinking, because that's the part, if that's happening, which is what I always aim to be the person having the most fun at the party. And I get a special like little jolt of joy when someone says, what, you weren't drinking tonight? Because I've been acting like such a moron at the party or dancing my butt off on the dance floor, right? That's how you role model it. And if women could just see that for themselves, then that's how you influence women and help them to drink less too, and try and experiment with it as well. So that was a roundabout answer to that question, but I feel like all of those pieces of the conversation are important. It's not just about the come over to my house for drinks tonight. It's the fact that there's also all kinds of stuff that's happening underneath that for so many women. 84% of North Americans drink, and we know that 50% of them wish they drank less. So you're not alone in this if you're thinking, oh, I think I've been drinking a little bit too much lately. We also know in the pandemic that drinking, unfortunately for women, has skyrocketed. Binge drinking went up, I think it was 37%. I might not have that number right, but like an inordinate amount over the course of the pandemic. And young women are suffering alcohol-related liver disease in like astronomical numbers as a result of the pandemic. So it's a pandemic within the pandemic. It's worth thinking about. If you're thinking to yourself, I don't know if this is serving me anymore, it's probably not. And it's worth it just to experiment with it and see, try to gather the other side of the deck just to see if maybe there's something better for you out there.
I love the way you said that underlying current, that underlying conversation that people aren't having. And I think the same thing is true with trying all the different diets and saying like, but this is just what I'm supposed to do. I'm a woman, I'm in midlife, my body's changing. This is just what I'm supposed to be doing. But how many of I actually want to be not eating carbs? Actually, no, but we're not going to talk about that. We're still going to talk about and maybe even try to one up each other. Like, what are you doing? What are you doing? Oh, I'm gaining the weight. Oh, well, here, try this. We want to support each other in that way. But what's not being said beneath the surface is it all sucks.
Yeah, I hate this. I hate this so much. I get on the scale every morning and I'm just cross my fingers and pray that it says the right thing and not the wrong thing, because there's a 50% chance it's going to say the wrong thing, right? Like, and then we don't talk about how that affects us. And then all day I just beat myself up. I just, that's exactly the same thing, that whole conversation that's not happening. Instead, it's like, oh my God, I've been doing this thing and I lost 15 pounds in 3 weeks and it's so great and it's working so well for me. That's all we hear. We don't hear what we know is statistically true, which is that 95% of diets fail within 2 years. And so it's not working for anyone really, right? But we're not talking about that.
Right. And I'm so glad you brought up the marketing piece around the alcohol and women too, and that in a way it's similar to the marketing around the diet and wellness industry. And,
100%.
To be informed consumers and understand what's really driving why we see the messages we do, whether it's about food, whether it's about alcohol, whether it's about how you parent, how you should be showing up in the world, all the things. Yeah.
What and who? Because I'm not, just so everyone knows, I'm not a raging feminist, but I'm also pretty sure that the majority of the diet industry profits males. So I just think it's worth thinking about that. Like, who's driving this messaging? And, why are we just buying into it mindlessly? And again, I did all of this around dieting too. Like, I have my own story around that. So there's no criticism or judgment here. I think it's, how can we not? We are bombarded with it constantly. But the first step in any change is mindfulness and awareness. And it always feels really uncomfortable. So if you're listening to this feeling uncomfortable because you're thinking, oh, I did that, or I'm buying into that, or I shared those memes. I did too, but I don't anymore. I don't do it anymore. And I bought into all the dieting stuff too. I threw my scale away when I stopped drinking, by the way. Just shocked it. It was the best thing I ever did. Oh my God, it was so great. It was so liberating.
Well, I'm so glad you brought up all those points, because as we're moving into the warmer season, at least here in North America, and it is a time for people to be getting together socially and getting together for the camping trips or the concerts or whatever. And there's always opportunity for alcohol to be involved. And so I'm really glad you brought some of those great points up so that women can challenge, like, do I want to do this weekend at the camping trip? Do I want to do this at this concert? And just take one event at the time, one social gathering at a time. And particularly if you're getting together with friends and family this summer, family reunions or whatever, and if you really feels that strong need, like, I need this to get through this, what's that about? And if there's something going on in those relationships that is better served reaching out and getting support for that with a therapist or whatever. So just, inviting women to come into this summer season and be curious and open and aware of, do you want to have alcohol be a part of your social connections this summer? And if not,
or even just like all of your social connections, maybe it's too prevalent and you'd like to cut back on it, because, anything that serves you better around alcohol is worth doing. And maybe it's just that, well, you know what? I don't want to drink every weekend this summer. Or I don't want to drink on every camping trip. And I'd like to see what it's like to go on a camping trip and not drink, and pay attention to what's available to you when you're not drinking. That's the key to this. Going into it and saying this, which is what I did in that first 30-day experiment, which basically is what led to me not drinking for 4.5 years, was, I wonder what might be available to me if alcohol wasn't running the show. Like, what my life be like? And then I really focused in on paying attention to that. And so there was the obvious stuff like better sleep and, my anxiety, my 3 o'clock in the morning anxiety disappeared. Surprise, surprise. So a lot of really obvious stuff, but then all these really very amazing things that I did not remotely anticipate, like being present with my children in a way that I had not been present with my children for so long. Having a sense of confidence that had been missing for years for me. Feeling more connected and intimate in my marriage, like just things I couldn't anticipate. So you got to leave some room in your heart for the impossible, go into it with an open mind and just see. And like I said, it's not about quitting drinking for everybody, but if you feel like it's taking more than it's giving right now, then it's worth some experimenting at the very least.
Yeah, that's really well said, and a great point to wrap up on. Wendy, where can people find more about your work and any programs you have going on this summer?
Yeah, the best place to find out about me is just on my website, which is wendymccallum.com. It's MCCALLUM. And you can also follow me on Instagram, and I'm at Beat Burnout and Booze on Instagram. That's probably the best place to find me.
Super. We'll put links to all that in the show notes, and I highly recommend people go and check out your website. You've got a lot of free resources there too, which can really help.
Oh, and my podcast. I should mention the podcast.
Yes.
Yeah, I always forget that, but I'm in the end of my second season. So there are, I think we're at like 85 episodes now. And if you're looking for more information around burnout, drinking, or the hormonal intersection between burnout, drinking, and perimenopause, there's tons and tons of episodes that deal with that. That'll be helpful.
Yes, highly recommend that. Absolutely. Well, thanks so much for being here, Wendy. It's great to meet you. And I look forward to staying in touch. And again, thanks for your time.
Oh, thanks, Amanda. It's my pleasure.